the wizard's
Good evening, Earth. This is Adam Sturch, podcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, Mexico, working on oil painting abyssal lights. Switching over from alchemical lights, letting that one dry for a little bit. And next step on this one is going to be very simple. Once again, I'm just going to light this figure up with some translucent glaze, a deep yellow, and then I'm going to model some of the features a little bit, just some little details, with a detail brush and some white translucent glaze. So put it about right there.
Depending on whether how often consciousness has used different hallucinogens.
I want a fairly intense glow, and I'll taper it out around the entire figure.
Our fingerprints upon the drugs we take, and drugs that have been taken for thousands of years, have a lot of fingerprints on them, and you join up with that. You enter into the field. One way of thinking, since somebody talked about Sheldrake earlier, one way of thinking about psychedelics and trying to define what do they do is that they are amplifiers of the morphogenetic field. That, the past of objects somehow becomes present. This would fit in with my notion that when you take a psychedelic, you are rising into some kind of superspace that can be mathematically described, because having the past be co-present with the present is a way of saying that you shift your dimensional relationship to the data field, and now it all appears to be one coherent thing. Yeah?
What is the plant that grows in the southwest that has harmony?
Pagamen harmala, the giant Syrian rue. Its original range is from Morocco to Manchuria, but at some time in the 19th century it was brought into this country as a range fodder for goats. I mean, it's a pretty rasty plant. It has small yellow flowers, and it has succulent leaves, sort of water-holding leaves, and it looks like a form of sagebrush. And when you cut into it with a knife or a machete, it's brilliant yellow inside. And that brilliant yellow is the harmony. Pound it up with a sledgehammer to separate the fibers and do a hot water wash on it. And then, do a second hot water wash. Then get rid of the physical stuff, combine the two mother liquors and drive it down to a reasonable volume, and it'll do the trick. Yeah. John Allegro and Andrzej Puharich, yeah.
And what's your assessment? Do you think there's any value comparison?
Well, not to rain on anybody's parade, Andrzej Puharich is a very mercurial person. Is that what we want to say? Recall that he was the guy who pushed Uri Geller for a long time, and they were forever tromping into the Negev and coming out with blank cassettes that had held the wisdom of the galaxy, but the aliens erased them before they let them return. That could happen here. So that's Andrzej Puharich. He's been around for a long time. I mean, these people are such eccentrics. I mean, you have to just respect people's persistence and survival power. But I think, his scholarship and his notion of the rules of evidence is fairly divergent, even from my fairly loose canon. So, Allegro is a little different case. You all know the book, The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross? He managed to hypothesize one of the most radical theories ever to come down the pike. I don't know how true it is, but his theory is that Jesus was a mushroom. And, this would not probably have cut too much mustard, except that the guy was a Dead Sea Scrolls scholar of world renown, had a scholar's grasp of Aramaic, and a Akkadian, and was fully licensed to be one of the people who tell us what the primary documents of Christianity really mean. The problem was, when Allegro got a hold of them, he said, well, what they really mean is that a sacramental mushroom was being grown in caves by Nabateans down around Qumran, and they called it Jesus in order to befuddle the Roman authorities, and created the cheerful theory of the friendly carpenter who tells us to render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. And this was all a publicity stunt just to keep the Roman authorities guessing. And he claims he has textual support for this. The problem is, you have to be an Aramaic philologist to follow the argument. I mean, the argument is unbelievably tortured. There is a lot of question. There is a peculiar opaqueness about the early history of Christianity. I mean, if we are to try and take it seriously and understand what happened there, then it must be that, first of all, if we believe Christ was a real person, then he must have been born in 6 BC, because there was a communitio maxima of Jupiter and Saturn at that time, which is a good astrological event to hang the nativity on, which means then that the crucifixion would have occurred in 27. Well, why is it then that there are no mention of Christ can be pushed back earlier than AD 69? What was going on between 27 and 69? The Gospels are not contemporaneous, and the mention in 69 is not even a sure thing. It's in Suetonius, and he says, Jews have recently come to Rome, agitating in the name of their leader Crispus. And that's the reference. And, it's puzzling, because take a figure as minor as Mani. Mani is the founder of Manichaeanism. He was born in Cilicia, Ctesiphon in the 700s. Well, God, we have Mani's laundry bills. I mean, we know how much he paid in taxes, the nickname he had for his dog. I mean, we have a lot of data on Mani, and so why a figure like Christ should be so peculiarly swathed in ambiguity if it was a real person with these people eager to chronicle it is a little hard to figure out.
Then I have the religion organism, like a kind of big organization. Whereas Christ had 12, God.
Yeah, I mean, Mani got right with it. I mean, he cultivated the court. He knew how to get his thing going, yeah. If any of you are interested in these kinds of questions and like your data in novel form, read The Transmigration of Timothy Archer by Philip K. Dick, which is a wonderful intellectual romp through all of these issues. It's essentially the fictional telling of the story of James Pike, who you may remember was the Episcopal Bishop of San Francisco and a great enthusiast for LSD. And he died in the Negev under very mysterious conditions. He parked his car and with a roadside map and a bottle of Coca-Cola in 115-degree heat, started walking toward the sea, the Dead Sea, and dehydrated and died. And he was very close to John Allegro. I'm not given to conspiracy theory, but you must have been following this whole hassle about the Dead Sea Scrolls. Well, a lot of people think it's because what is written there is incommensurate with Christianity as it has existed for 1,700 years, and nobody knows what to do with this stuff. I mean, it's the equivalent of what do you do with the doctrine of the resurrection if somebody comes up with the mummy of Christ? Well, that's the kind of situation that these Dead Sea Scrolls may place Christian hermeneutics in. John Allegro's book? No, John Allegro died recently. Sacred Mushroom, oh no, the book by Philip K. Dick is called The Transmigration of Timothy Archer. Yeah.
Are you aware of Edmund Bezzecchi's translations?
Oh yes, he's another one.
But his really tweaking line is How the Great Can Die.
Right.
And it's an expose of Jesus Veronica versus this was of Jesus. It does, yeah.
Yes, well, the empire never died, which is Philip K. Dick's motto. The Gnostic temperament is alive and well. In fact, there hasn't been a century as friendly to Gnosticism as the 20th since the 4th. So there you have it.
I've got a little bit of revelation. It sounds like a description of purgatory.
Well, this has been suggested. What you need to, to put the Gospel of John in, to put the Gospel of John in context, get Charles's book, the Apocrypha and Pseudepigrapha of the New Testament.
This concludes Tape 5. Our program continues with Tape 6.
And then you see everything that the Church Fathers tossed out. Because you see the canon, the New Testament, is a group of accounts that were able to survive the sorting process of the Council of Nicaea. And there was a huge literature which was just tossed out as being too weird. Read the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Thomas. Have you all looked at the Nag Hammadi Library? Do you know what this is? The Nag Hammadi Library is 42 texts which were dug up in Upper Egypt in 1948 at a Coptic monastery called Chenovoskion. 42 texts that went into the ground AD 220. Means nobody has been able to put a finger on them since AD 220. It's like a fossil of Christianity in the 3rd century. Well, my God, you can barely map it on to the cheerful religion that we inherit as Christianity. It is an exotic and complicated situation. It's very well worth reading. I'm sure the Metaphysical Bookstore in Berkeley, in Boulder, will sell you. James M. Robinson is the editor, and it's called the Nag Hammadi Library. 42 texts reflecting early Christianity, Gnosticism, and so forth and so on. Hans Jonas is a brilliant, his book, Gnosticism, The Message of the Alien God to Infant Christianity, if that's not a title to die for. Huh? Oh, the Apocrypha and Pseudepigrapha of the New Testament by Charles. And it weighs in at about 35 pounds, but theological libraries will have it, but it's in the locked case. You don't want seminarians mucking around with this kind of stuff.
I mentioned the Urantia book too, which has about 2,000 pages on the life of Christ, and covers those years after 30 years of the
That's right. The Urantia book is a very spectacular and early example of channeling before it was even named. Very interesting. Of all the channeled material, the Urantia book, for pure grandiosity, puts everybody else to shame, right?
They talk about secret flavor.
Yeah, well, these are persistent themes, all of Gnosticism is the perception that we don't belong here, that we are creatures of another realm, beings of light, who, because of some horrible cosmic mistake, have been trapped in the world of matter. And the Gnostics take the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of Moses, and turn it into a nightmare story, and say that, the God of this world, which in Jewish tradition is called Yahweh, who is the creator of the world, for the Gnostics, he is not the real God at all. He's the demiurge. He's a kind of mad god who has entrapped the light, and the task of salvation is to gather the light and then release it back to its hidden higher source beyond the machinery of cosmic fate. Well, that's good. It's sort of like, the Mandukya Upanishad. It's my favorite Upanishad because it's the shortest. It's only a page and a half long, which, others should have been so similarly inspired to brevity. But it's the breath of Brahman. It traces, it's the description of one exhalation, inhalation cycle. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're not even supposed to say it if you're Orthodox. G-B. Yeah.
I'm fascinated by the Rastafarian comfort, the job, job, or in the same phrase, hallelujah, is supposed to be that. What is your understanding of that?
Well, I don't know too much about Rastafarianism. It was founded by Marcus Garvey and had this notion of return to Africa. Syncretism is always with us. Gnosticism was characterized by syncretism. The whole late Hellenic religious efflorescence was largely syncretic. And certainly that's what we have now. I mean, the New Age, you go to these fairs and the people who are talking to the Pleiades have the booth next to the people who are talking to Zenebelk and Nubi, and both have world plans from the Saussurian Allfathers, and the two plans are different, and you just,
Gnosticism is alive and well in all academia. I mean, there has like Marvin how you work on one example of the human brain. So a computer can, kind of come pure information. So then that's not released when people matter pure information. I don't know what it is.
No, I agree. There are two sentiments loose in the world, and you're going to not get through this life without taking sides. Do you believe that our destiny is in another dimension made of light on the other side of the universe? Or do you believe that we should, clean up the rainforests and save the planet? You want to be very careful with your political agenda. One of my sub-interests, which sort of has a relationship to this, but it's oblique, is asteroidal impacts. I think asteroidal impacts are one of the great undiscussed factors in evolution, that every solid body in the solar system is heavily cratered with impacts by infalling bodies. There's this thing down in Arizona that only happened 50,000 years ago. It was a piss-ant-sized object, and everything within 800 miles of the impact point died instantly. It dug a hole half a mile into the ground. It was a nothing burger. This thing which came down 65 million years ago, they now think on the Yucatan, that it killed everything on the earth larger than a chicken died. And you want to talk about ecotastrophe. I mean, you can't even conceive of what it's like when something like that happens to a planet. They estimate that at the velocity this thing must have been traveling, it was 5 miles into the planet in the first second and a half. It raised a wall of rocks 6,000 feet high that moved outward at Mach 7. And the planet rang for 1 million years, but if it hadn't been for that, there would be no flowering plants, no triumph of the mammals, no Whitney Houston, no...
Sperm internet.
Well, but suppose, there's all this tumult in our psyche about the great change that's supposed to happen, and where are we supposed to put our political energies, and what are we supposed to be doing? Well, it would be pretty ironic if we, beat ourselves over the head and save the rainforest and all this malarkey, and then something came down and just turned the whole thing into hash. Then people would say, my God, How could we have been so stupid? We should have been extracting and sequestering U-235 and plutonium. We should have been building starships the size of Montana. We should have been sparing no effort. And what did we do? We replanted rainforests. And now look, the whole thing. So you have to, good intentions are not sufficient. You have to locate where the threat is coming from and act accordingly. There are no points for good intentions in the game of evolution. So mind, and we have to decide, what does life want? Is it that life at its most basic level senses the finite duration of the star's life, and so it wants to use this moment of sunshine to build something that could carry us out into the mainstream of the galaxy, to the denser star fields? Or, is that some kind of titanic, Apollonian, male-dominated, techno-fascist, materialist trip? And what we need to do is cultivate gentleness and attention to the bugs and the grasses and the water. I don't have an answer to that. I think it's a real dilemma. I think people who think they do have answers haven't really connected with how ambiguous the situation really is. How can you do both?
What says the mushroom? Well, no, I think some people can do behind that. People go all the time.
Well, what the mushroom says is it's a total apocalyptarian. I mean, it says, rouse your camels, pack your tents, we're moving out. This has been fine for a while, but ahead lie worlds of unimaginable challenge at great distance. But, of course, the mushroom sounds like a techno-fascist, hortatory male dominator when it talks like that. You take ayahuasca and it says, clean up the rivers, care for the children, replant the forest. Well,
but then you have to look at the mushroom, possibly being the universal traveler that it is. It has that urge. It's got the wanderlust. So, of course, it's going to be a compliment.
that's right, it has nomadic ethics, so it pushes nomadic solutions, where the ayahuasca, an enormous jungle plant, a flowering plant, a creature born out of the last catastrophe, just like we are, has a different agenda. No, the demons are of many kinds. Some are made of ions, some of mind. The ones of DMT, you'll find, stutter often and are blind. It means, just because somebody once said of channeling, just because somebody's dead doesn't mean they're smart. So, it could be, everybody has their own agenda. Well, why don't we break, last question.
Speaking of astrological events, are you aware of where the oils were?
On the steady state or something? Oh, yeah, the panspermia theory.
Yeah, and again, there is strongly for, I think, even AIDS may not have come out of Port Deca, but it may actually have come out of space, and oil has an impressive array of statistics that link planetary presence in near orbit to viral disease.
Yeah, well, I think that the next revolution in biology is so obvious that you can be totally radical and completely confident you're on safe ground and say the next great revolution in biology is the realization that space is not a barrier to life, and that technology is only one method for traversing between the stars. If, in fact, planets are regularly pulverized by cosmic catastrophes, then they must be like bursting seed pods. And everything is subjected to a tremendous evolutionary hammering, but spores, viruses, stuff like that, particulate matter, it just drifts out between the stars, and then when it finds another suitable environment, it breaks out. We don't know what the constraints on life are. The oceans of Europa could harbor life. These hot vent, sulfur vent organisms that we find in the deep oceans here, they could survive in the oceans of Europa. If there were hot sulfur vents at the bottom of those oceans, those organisms wouldn't bat an eye. Europa is covered with ice, but underneath the ice is water, and there are fractures. The exotic chemistries and pressures and temperatures of the Jovian environment could produce life. We don't know what the constraints are. If cometary environments are a better place for life to arise than a warm pond on a newly condensed planet, well, then all bets are off as to what, planetary surfaces may be unlikely places for life to get going. It's hard to say. That's right. We don't know. You could have life at temperatures and pressures where we couldn't exist for a microsecond, like at the bottom of the Jovian atmosphere, something like that. No, there's more mystery than anything else. The notion here is, I've always felt that the psychedelic experience should be good for something in a very practical sense, and I always felt that there was something that wanted that you should be able to learn that was very hard to bring out. And we talked a little bit yesterday.
All right, well,
about this strange episode
that kind of down to the minute there.
Where instead of an ordinary
but
trip,
that gets some detail started,
in for weeks
and
weeks,
the basic
and
lighting for the
people
figure
differed as to whether it was a
in.
transformative
Now it's just a matter of
incident or a
modeling and
psychosis or
patiently
what
rendering
exactly it was.
the facial features and
But
such with
what
layers
happened
of light and dark.
or what I think
So I'll
wants
go
to
back
happen in
over
every
another
psychedelic
bright yellow
experience
glaze
is
and then redo the
that
white,
there is a
probably a couple more times
totality
until it's
symbol.
a little more dimensional.
Try to
But
get
for the moment, that's
patients
good. That's
to
Adam
make
Sturch
models
broadcasting for the Mushroom Mansion,
because
Taos, New
they were
Mexico, working on oil
totality
painting
symbols.
abyssal
Well,
lights,
eventually the totality
and having to
symbol
go
is
feed
more
my
than a
cat, who
symbol.
just
It
slunk
actually becomes
into her
a
room
true
there.
map
Idle on the cat.
of the totality.
Idle on. All
What
right.
this boils down to is a kind
gonna
of very
demand snacks,
strange
so I must go.
revelation about the nature of the I Ching
Thanks again. Have a good night.
that takes very seriously